Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. And today we'll talk about remote work and diversity. Specifically, JPMorgan CEO Jamie Dimon said that diversity and remote work don't go together. He said that going back to the office will improve diversity and working from home will harm diversity, therefore. So that's what he said. Now, is he right? If he's right, that's important because a diverse workforce definitely helps improve financial performance. So does a return to the office help diversity? Not really. If you look at the evidence, the opposite is actually true. Remote work is what improves diversity. The return to the office harms diversity. So when you look at the research, it shows pretty clearly that firm diversity correlates with improved financial results. So the more diversity is in a firm, the more you have people of various underrepresented groups in the firm, then the more you improve your financial results, and you have teams with diverse participants. The more diverse the team, the better the decisions they make. So we clearly know that diversity is good for financial performance and good for decision making, which is also good for financial performance. But what you really want to understand is that we clearly have evidence, both from large companies and from surveys, that more remote work, so not mostly or fully in-office work, but mostly or fully remote work, that's what correlates with diversity. So let's talk about a specific company, a large company. You might have heard of it, called Meta, what used to be called Facebook. It found that remote work led to a more diverse workforce in its efforts to actually hire a diverse workforce. So as the pandemic started, Meta decided that it will offer fully permanent remote work options for its workers. So it said, don't have to return to the office. You can work fully remotely if your position allows it, and many positions at Meta allow working fully remotely for current and new employees. Their results really show that Jamie Dimon's claims, the CEO of JPMorgan, are incorrect. Meta actually saw a really large increase in its diverse hires, meaning Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, people with disabilities, veterans, women, and remember, women are underrepresented groups in the tech sector. Let's take a look at its 2022 diversity report from which this information comes. Now, in 2019, so before the pandemic, Meta made a 5-year plan with certain diversity goals that it wanted to reach by 2024. And what it found was that it achieved its 2024 5-year diversity goals 2 years ahead of schedule. So in 3 years, that's very unusual. Companies usually underperform on their diversity goals. So that 5-year time scale, the regular expected scenario is that Meta would have achieved some, but not all of its diversity goals. But now, already 2 years ahead of schedule, it had overachieved its diversity goals. And that is just due to remote work, due to the option of working remotely for its staff. So what happened? There's been a lot of improvement at Meta since 2019. It doubled the number of women in its global workforce around the world and Black and Hispanic workers in the US, which is part of its goals in the 2019 plans for 5 years. It achieved those goals in 2022, in 3 years. It also increased, and this was not a goal, but that it set out to achieve in 2019, but it found that because of its remote work options, it also increased the number of employees with disabilities from 4.7% to 6.2%, which is a pretty large jump. Now, the Meta Chief Diversity Officer said that the candidates who accepted job offers for remote positions were much more likely, substantially more likely, that's exactly what they said, quote, substantially more likely, unquote, to come from diverse communities, underrepresented groups. So including ethnic diversity, so people who are Black, Hispanic, Alaskan Native, Native American, and other groups that are underrepresented in the tech sector, like people with disabilities, veterans, women. So these are the kind of groups that Meta saw were substantially more likely to accept remote positions, which Meta was offering. Meta's VP of Workforce Diversity Inclusion, different than the Chief Diversity Officer, said that quote, embracing remote work and being distributed first has allowed Meta to become a more diverse company, unquote. So again, this is all because the underrepresented groups were much more likely to apply for and take the positions that Meta was offering working remotely. Research shows that people of color and other underrepresented groups clearly prefer remote work. So there's a Future Forum survey which found that, talking about support for full-time in-office return among knowledge workers. So white knowledge workers, 21% of them wanted full-time in-office work. What about black knowledge workers? Only 3%. Only 3% of black knowledge workers want to work full-time in the office. And the support for a fully flexible schedule, let's talk about another dimension of things. Men, let's take a look at them. 26% of white men want a fully flexible schedule, so complete flexibility, but 38% of black men want that schedule. What about women? 25% of white women want that schedule and 33% of black women want that schedule. So clearly we see that, again, underrepresented groups want a more flexible schedule. There was a study by the Society for Human Resource Management, so survey, which found that worker support for permanent work from home, white workers are 39% want fully complete just work from home, while black knowledge workers, 50% of them want to work from home all the time. So again, pretty larger number of black workers and white workers want to work from home at all times. Now, why do so many people of color not want to return to the office? Well, because black workers are less vulnerable to discrimination, microaggressions, and other sorts of harassment when they're not there in the office. So they're also free from code switching, which means accommodating their ways that their cultural norms to the white mainstream norm. So speech, appearance, and behavior. So that is also quite a burden and drain for black workers, and they don't have to do that if they're not coming to the office. So, desire for remote work among other underrepresented groups matches or exceeds that of black workers. We know that other underrepresented groups also want to work more time remotely. For example, women. They have more non-work responsibilities like household chores, childcare, caring for elderly parents, and so on. People with disabilities. Well, if they're at home, those with disabilities can have better accommodation overall, and they don't have to deal with the stress of the commute, which again, for people with disabilities tends to be challenging. And then avoid having to deal with common side glances by coworkers, which is pretty annoying and draining for people with disabilities. Unfortunately, cognitive biases, these dangerous mental errors that we all tend to experience as human beings, cause leaders to make bad decisions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, Jamie Dimon. He fell victim likely to a number of mental blind spots. For example, the belief bias, which is evaluating claims based on what we want to be true rather than what is the actual data. We see very clearly from the data that, you assign a summer intern to look at the data, you'll very clearly find that black workers overall, women overall, people with disabilities overall, and other sorts of veterans have a much stronger preference for remote work rather than coming to the office. And obviously coming to the office hurts diversity. Staying remote helps diversity, as Meta found. The confirmation bias is another one. It's looking for information that confirms our beliefs and rejecting information that goes against our beliefs. So that belief bias and confirmation bias are likely what led Jamie Dimon astray and many, many other leaders who make similar claims. Now, that doesn't mean that remote work is a panacea for people in underrepresented groups. You still have to address some real issues in remote jobs, whether they're fully remote or part-time remote, which we call hybrid. You still have to address some of those issues. For example, in virtual meetings, there are still some challenges like bullying of underrepresented groups, harassment of these groups, mansplaining and interruptions, which is men interrupting women frequently and trying to explain things to women that women already know. That's what mansplaining is. That's what the term means. Now, how do you support underrepresented groups in these meetings? Well, you want to train staff to help hybrid and remote meetings that are going to address DEI issues, be inclusive and sensitive to diversity concerns. So train staff on these issues. That's very important. Again, hybrid meetings and remote meetings are different from in-person meetings. So people need to be trained on how to manage them effectively, especially in such a way as to address DEI issues. Now, how do you manage these interruptions if you're a manager? So here's a checklist. Let all attendees finish their thoughts and make sure that other people don't interrupt them. And again, stop those interrupting others. Stop people from talking over each other. That's really important. Use the raised hand function for Q&A sessions. That's quite useful. Or have people chat in the chat any questions instead of interrupting. That's quite useful. Now, if you see bullying, how do you deal with that? Well, you want to check with your underrepresented staff about bullying first. You might see it, but you should also solicit it, get that information out there. Don't assume that just because you don't see it, it doesn't happen. Then you want to be trained as a manager, so train your managers to talk to the people who engage in bullying about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate workplace behavior, and manage and work with them to change those problematic behavior patterns. Now, another area that you really want to work on is boosting social connections. That's especially important for underrepresented groups. We know that there was a decrease in connection overall among remote workers. That's a common challenge. Remote workers tend to form increased connections with those in their own team, but decreased connections with those outside their team. Number of connections overall among new hires is down 17% because they form connections with those in their team, but they form less connections with those outside their team because they see them less, right? They're working remotely. So that's a problem. Now, what you want to do is increase cross-functional collaboration through mentoring, pairing junior staff with senior colleagues. So having these mentoring relationships is really important. So how do you do this? Well, the barriers to advancement for underrepresented groups, we very clearly see extensive research shows, come from a lack of connection to senior staff, like informal mentoring, sponsorship, and so on. So you want to create a formal mentoring program to address these problems. Provide minority staff with 2 senior mentors, one from the same minority group and one from a majority group. And these people should be from outside their immediate team. So just have those mentors be from outside their immediate team. That's really useful. So that is a very good strategy to provide minority staff with these mentors. And that's something that we're doing at the University of Southern California Information Sciences Institute. That's one of my clients, and we're creating a mentoring program that specifically has that dimension where one of the people who will be mentoring that person, we're going to aiming to match them to have a minority staff member have someone from their own minority group to get that support that would not be coming from someone who is not from that same minority group and doesn't know the kind of issues that that person is dealing with. They don't know those issues viscerally. So that the benefits is that you'll have a diverse network of connections and opportunity to draw on the experience of people who are from the same minority group, same underrepresented group. That is quite useful because they understand the kind of challenges that the represented person is experiencing that someone who is in the mainstream group would not. But you also want someone from the mainstream to connect that person who is being mentored to a mainstream opportunities and contacts. So both from the underrepresented group and the mainstream groups. You'll get implicit knowledge and valuable relationships. Also, the fact that it's 2 mentors lessens the workload for each mentor. So that's quite useful as well. So the best practice for an effective mentoring program is to link mentoring to performance evaluation for each mentor. Make sure that that's part of the way that the mentor is evaluated, how well they're doing mentoring as part of their performance evaluation. More broadly, you want to have a survey that measures DEI efforts, internal surveys that identify DEI issues, and then take steps to remedy these issues, right? So you'll use the survey to ask underrepresented staff, so focus on the underrepresented staff about what are their experience with DEI challenges, ideas to solve these issues most effectively, and then you integrate this feedback into your diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. So to implement a diverse and inclusive culture in the workplace, you really need to address these problems. So you survey about these issues. And then once you know the nature of the problem, once you know its extent, create an effective diversity, equity, inclusion plan to fix it by integrating the solutions we discussed here. So things like the mentoring program, like addressing bullying, and so on. And then measuring how well you are improving diversity, equity, inclusion by running surveys once again. And so you want to adopt these best practices for diversity in hybrid and remote work. And if you avoid the mistakes of executives like Jamie Dimon, like failing to look at the hard data and making false claims that just align with your beliefs and not hiring a summer intern to actually research these things, you'll get much better off. You'll have the same kind of benefits that Meta got. You'll outperform your diversity goals and you'll improve your financial performance. Because again, good diversity is strongly linked to good financial performance. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, which is a future work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to leave a review for the show wherever you checked it out, whether it's iTunes or elsewhere. That's very helpful for other people to discover the show and for me to learn more about what you prefer so I can change the show to align with your preferences. And please make sure to subscribe to the show. Again, wherever you checked it out, we have a video cast and podcast form. So if you have it on YouTube, subscribe there. Have it on iTunes, check it out there. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. And in the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.